All right, welcome everyone to Rupp Falsgraff's Empire State Entrepreneurs and New York Business Law podcast, a really fun and informative forum for us to showcase our clients, strategic partners, and community leaders to talk about important issues for entrepreneurs and business owners throughout New York. My name is David Falsgraff, and I'm blessed to be the managing partner at Rupp Falsgraff, a full-service law firm headquartered right here in Buffalo with offices throughout New York. And I've been doing this podcast now for a few months, and I'm super excited to welcome a special guest. And before I get to my guest, as always, I'm very, very fortunate to be able to do these podcasts at the headquarters of Incept Studios, which is a full-service marketing firm, also headquartered right here in downtown Buffalo. And our friends Mike and Eric always do such a great job at making us sound and on occasion look good, and really, really appreciative. My law firm has been using Incept now for a couple of years, and they've done just a bang-up job at helping us tell our story to the community that we live in and do work in. So thank you, Eric, and everyone here at Incept for your continued hospitality. With that, I'm gonna introduce my special guest, Jamie Obletz. Jamie's a good friend, and he's currently got a pretty big job here in Buffalo, working for Delaware North Companies as their group president of both Delaware North Sports Service as well as the Patina Group. So thank you for taking time out of your day to be with me, Jamie.
Dave, happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored, a bit humbled, and quite frankly, a bit impressed by the whole setup here and the focus here. So happy to chat with you and your listeners today.
That's awesome. Well, I know you've had a very diverse career, Jamie, and it took a lot to get you to a point where you came back here to take on this position at Delaware North that we're going to talk a lot about. But before we do so, give our listeners a sense of your upbringing and your background, and ultimately we'll get to Buffalo, but I know there were some stops in your journey before that time.
Yeah, absolutely. A Buffalo native, proud Buffalo native, grew up here, attended the Park School of Buffalo throughout most of my education locally, went off to Boston College and made my first of two return trips to Buffalo and to Western New York to start my career at M&T Bank, a phenomenal organization today, and even 20 years ago when I started my career there. Really cut my teeth in business, went through their management development program and learned business and banking and finance in a very thoughtful way, and stayed there for my first 5 years. But got a little bit of that itch that you do when you're 28 and 29, and decided to leave Buffalo and pursue an MBA. And I hadn't studied finance or corporate finance or business at the undergraduate level, and felt that was a missing piece of my resume. So after 5 great years at M&T, left the bank, moved to New York City, attended Columbia Business School for 2 years and got an MBA there. Fell in love with the city in New York City at the time, and decided to stay and pursued a career in investment banking at J.P. Morgan, and was there in their investment bank, focused on real estate, lodging, leisure, and gaming sectors or companies, and was there through my associate vice president and director years in investment banking, working 100 hours a week, 18 hours a day, and really cutting my teeth in the corporate finance world in New York in investment banking at a global money center bank like J.P. Morgan.
I know a lot of our guest speakers on this podcast will get into things that have sort of shaped who they are. And when I think about you, Jamie, the word resilient comes to mind. And I think, as I recall, I might not have the story perfect, but I know it wasn't perfectly easy to get into business school, and that at the time you felt you had to sort of take matters into your own hands to try to ensure that you would have an opportunity to attend a school like Columbia. Can you tell us a little bit about how that whole thing went down?
This could be a bit of resiliency. It could be a bit of just don't take no for an answer. Columbia was my first choice, and I got waitlisted at Columbia, which was basically at the time a no. And I wasn't having any of this, and took matters into my own hands, as you say, and bought a ticket to New York and got on a plane the next day and flew down to New York unannounced and showed up at the admissions office and said, I'd like to talk to the admissions department. Long story short, ended up having a coffee chat with an admissions officer and pled my case face-to-face. And a few weeks after that, I was admitted. So a little bit of luck, a little bit of perseverance, a little bit of focus, and it all kind of paid out, which I think is a good lesson 15 years after the fact for folks to keep in mind.
Without question. I think that's indicative at times of sort of the thinking differently or being resilient or working hard and creating opportunities for yourself and not necessarily letting them come to you. And, being a proud Buffalo born and bred person myself, I wonder, Jamie, was it hard for you? M&T Bank is such a great employer here in town, and I am certain that you would have had an incredible career, much like your friend Rob Drake, our mutual friend, who's does commercial lending for the bank now, and is going to, I think and hope, make it a great career there. And that could have been you. And I'm curious. Was it a hard decision looking back and sort of being bold and brave and doing something that might have been harder to move to New York or to think about business school than sort of just staying along a traditional career path here in Buffalo? Yeah,
looking incredibly hard. I think there's merits to both paths, and people can be wildly successful in either one. I took a little bit of a leap of faith and try to do just that, try to branch out on my own, leave the bank after what I thought was a great start to my career, leaving a great institution with a great culture and a great management team, and pursuing something a bit different, taking a little bit different tact. So it is that leap of faith. It is that risk journey and that out of your comfort zone. It harkens back to the perseverance that you mentioned before. It all has come for a circle, and I returned to Buffalo following J.P. Morgan, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I think it did just that. It helped give me the training and exposure that I thought I needed in a very discernible way, and made that jump out of the bank into business school and then into another larger bank to get that training.
Tell me a little bit about J.P. Morgan. I haven't interviewed anyone, nor am I sure that I ever will, who actually worked at such a established international brand like J.P. Morgan. So dive a little deeper into sort of what type of role you had at J.P. Morgan and how it sort of helped give you experience that ultimately is a great benefit to you today.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note is J.P. Morgan, in many ways, from my perspective, was a larger M&T, heavily focused on communities, heavily focused on conservative lending practices and strong balance sheets, and led by a larger-than-life figure. At the time at M&T, it was Bob Wilmers. Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan has since become Renee Jones in his leadership at the bank. But both banks have very similar parallels to one another, heavily focused on culture, conservatism, sound business practices, and sound lending practices, and focuses on the community and led by really spectacular leaders in their own part. So from that perspective, coming out of business school, it was very attractive to me to go into a bank like that in many ways resembled the bank I was coming from. You go into investment banking and you kind of got to know what you're getting into. You kind of had to have thick skin and sleepless nights and long hours. But it's just that. It's a great spot to cut your teeth at a very, very high profile level. The learning and exposure is spectacular. The deal flow and deal activity that you'll see and learn and get acclimated to is next level. It's not for everybody. It's not long-term for everybody. For me, it was a great stepping stone from business school into the real world to get some really, really applicable experience. So I did that, which felt like 100 years, but it was about 7 years in investment banking. And luckily, what led me to leave J.P. Morgan and leave New York and return to Buffalo for the second of two times was at J.P. Morgan. You have a lot of exposure to clients. It's a client-oriented business, no different than Rupp Pfalzgraf is, very focused on client deal flow and client management. One of my clients happened to be Delaware North, which at the time despite growing up here, I hadn't had a lot of exposure to. I knew of Delaware North to a certain extent, but not in a very deep way. I got to know them a bit better from a finance banking relationship perspective when I was at J.P. Morgan, and they came calling to me looking for somebody with my background to return to Western New York and to fill a defined role, which has really led me out of investment banking into Delaware North back in 2016.
So you make a difficult but a good decision ultimately to come back to Buffalo. And when you move back here, it's with a job in hand at Delaware North.
That's exactly right. The job joining Delaware North was initially envisioned to be, and it was for the first few years, a job very consistent with what I was doing at J.P. Morgan, just doing it in-house for Delaware North. So at J.P. Morgan, you're predominantly focused on corporate finance and M&A or mergers and acquisitions. You're doing it in a consultative way for your clients, advising and structuring and executing transactions on behalf of clients. Delaware North made the thoughtful decision of creating that role or that position in-house and looked for somebody with my skill set and my background. Admittingly, I think they thought it was a bit of an easy sell having grown up here and been in Buffalo, so they didn't have to put too much of a sell on it, which they typically have to do to get people that aren't from Buffalo to sell them on Buffalo before they get to know Buffalo. So just as I had done 10 years previously of making that jump out of Western New York and out of Buffalo into business school and then ultimately investment banking, I did the reverse jump, this time with a wife in hand, coming from New York back to Buffalo to start my career at Delaware North, which I'll spend a few minutes on.
Tell us the first few years then as you move back here and you take on this M&A corporate finance role. What does it look like, or what are you doing day to day for the first couple of years that you're at Delaware North? Yeah,
so I'll give a quick plug on Delaware North for your listeners to understand a bit about the company.
That'd be great.
So the company, headquartered and based in Buffalo, owned and operated by the Jacobs family, has been around for 100 years, and is a bit of a sleeping giant in the hospitality business. We operate in a number of different verticals, all hospitality oriented. So we're in sports stadia and arenas and ballparks and football stadiums. We are in airports. We're in casinos, lodging in hotels, restaurants, catering, and we do that kind of on a global basis, all based on right here in Buffalo. Today, our revenues exceed $4 billion. Our employee count is over 50,000, and we have the wind at our back in terms of growth and performance. A far cry from where we were during COVID, which I'll spend a few minutes on because I think it's an interesting dynamic and perspective, especially for our company. I came into the company heavily focused on growth. This is at the time where the company was in a very steep growth trajectory, and my remit and my role was to try to bring all this together and focused on trying to grow through investment and acquisition and mergers and to propel the company into the next level of its growth trajectory. And that's where I spent the first few years at Delaware North. I think when you come into a role like that in my seat, you kind of have one of two different paths you can pursue. You can stick to your knitting and really just do the M&A piece of that work. You can just run the traps on the finance and the deal negotiation and kind of live the art of the deal, right, somewhat independent of the broader company. And you can be very successful doing that. I chose a bit of a different tact, which was to not only do that, but in the process really learn as much as I could about the business. Ask 1,000 questions, meet as many people as possible, jump on as many projects and teams well beyond my core function as I could, raise my hand, get involved, really kind of take a more deep dive approach to the business in a very holistic way. And my view was the more I can learn about the company, the better I'll be at my day job of the M&A or the corporate development aspect of my role. And I think looking back, it was that early on approach to the position, to the company, to the role that ultimately set me up for the next chapter of my career within the company. So that's a bit about the company and a bit about my early on role, heavily focused on growth and development for the business.
I'd love, and we'll get into some sort of lessons that you've learned along the way. But as you're talking, Jamie, I'm thinking another word to describe you. I would, having known you for a while, would be curious. There's a curiosity about you, and I guess for the sake of our listeners, does that trait translate into sort of longer term success, or do you think the hard work that you did to get to know other business lines or other departments or other people, whether it's at J.P. Morgan, M&T Bank, or Delaware North, sort of serve you well for future success?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's that curiosity and that inquisitiveness and that quest for learning, I think, is so critical. It's one that served me well. It's it comes naturally to me, I think, just from a personal perspective. But I think in terms of looking for future leaders and the recruiting aspect of my role today and training and development, that inquisitiveness, that curiosity, that business understanding is so fundamental. It's worked well for me, I think, and it's a trait that we look for very succinctly within our leadership ranks in terms of understanding the business in the future.
Did you, as you then, it's 2016, 17, 18, this role, I assume that you helped, lead the charge at a couple acquisitions that the company met under your watchful eye. What other impact did you have in this role in those sort of, say, the first 3 to 4 years that you were with Delaware North?
Yeah, exactly that. I think the impact was probably twofold. One is you can look back at transactions that we did, investments that we made. We purchased or invested in hotels or casinos. We've made some international acquisitions, especially in Australia and in the UK, all under the guise of trying to grow and enhance our business profile in the segments that we operate. And you can look at kind of that as a tear sheet or a scorecard and look back on those impacts. I think the impact for me was probably a bit more broad than that, and which was to say, take a holistic view of the business and be a leader in that business to help guide and ask questions and push and understand the culture and the business profile to be that much more additive to my role currently, which was a kind of attack that I made somewhat deliberatively within the business. So we invested a lot, we grew a lot, we invested almost $1 billion of capital in that time period. But more personally, it was that holistic understanding of the company which helped me in that role and then helped me transition to future roles.
And you currently head up sports service in the Patina Group, and I want to hear about sort of what is occupying your time day in and day out with that role. But there was an interim role between when you were working more on corporate finance and M&A and prior to taking on the helm at sports service and Patina. And remind me sort of what you were doing in between those two. Yeah,
sure. So it was the end of 2019, and an opening came up at one of our business lines in our airport business, and I raised my hand. And I said, even though I don't have the day-to-day operational experience, and even though I didn't grow up in that business per se, I've known enough about the business and have worked on opportunities to invest in that business and have done some transactions in that business that I think I can come in and make a statement and add value from day one. And that took a little bit of convincing, right? Because you don't have that resume underneath you to be the segment head of a business line. At the time was $500 million in revenue, had about 8,000 or 9,000 associates. We're in about 30 different airports in North America. But I was successful in my pursuit to transition from the development or the growth side of the business into the operational side of the business, leading a business line. And all would have worked out quite well, other than I think my timing was a little bit off because I took over the business on January 1st of 2020. At the time, nobody had ever heard of coronavirus or COVID, but 60 days later, the world basically ended. And as you can imagine, almost every one of our business lines at Delaware North were incredibly impacted, probably no more greatly than our airport business, with air traffic completely shut down by the time we got to March of 2020. Air traffic shut down. The business still had to have some level of openness. You couldn't just shut the lights off and leave the airport because you had some level of travel, although it was probably 2 or 3% of what the total travel had been just a few weeks prior. So that onset, that honeymoon period of that first 2 months ended quickly. And by March, like a lot of companies, we were significantly impacted. And here I was trying to oversee a business line, with not defined historical experience in that business line and having to take it through a tumultuous period. A lot of companies were impacted. I think back to COVID, very unfortunately. Ours was severely impacted. Our revenues went from over $4 billion to zero in a day. All of our business at Delaware North is day of transactions. You're buying your food or beverage or your hotel stay or your casino or your entertainment. That's all transactions that happen day of. So when all that shuts down and people are sent home, we're not a bank or we're not a commercial business that has annuity-like revenue streams. Our revenue streams ended in a day, literally a few days. So that set off a very challenging period of time for anyone in that type of a business, including us, to try to maneuver through and manage through. So that next year, March of 2020, for the balance of the year, it was back to my investment banking first year associate days. Those 15, 18-hour work days, that incredible pressure and stress of just trying to understand the business, understand the contracts and the unions and the commercial agreements, and work through an onslaught of challenges, which was incredibly both challenging, but at the same time a bit rewarding in terms of learning the business. We were impacted, but obviously the most of the impact was from the associates that could no longer work or could no longer come to our business or come to our establishments or come to our restaurants or our food service outlets across the country and work. And those were very, very challenging times for everyone involved.
Tell me, give us a little insight. Such a incredible period of time, and to be in the service industry and to have that sort of literal flip of a light switch impact. What was it like to be in the room with other decision makers? And once you got over the initial shock and stress of realizing the impact that the pandemic would have on your business, I like the reference to sort of hearkening back to early on in your career when it was a 24/7 mindset and very focused on mission, and in this case obviously survival. But any anecdotes or any interesting meetings or how you were able to turn an incredibly stressful time period into ultimately an opportunity for the company?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like every business, there's a playbook to a certain extent, which is to, at that point early on in the pandemic, it's survival mode. It's trying to right-size your expense base as quickly as possible to preserve cash and liquidity and balance sheet availability to survive what could be a very tumultuous period of time. We got on ahead of it pretty early, and that first few weeks, few months, it's how do you survive? Luckily, that mindset started to shift pretty quickly for us, and it was once we had a pretty good line of sight in terms of survival, it became how are you going to better yourself? How are you going to learn as much about your company and about your business as possible in this kind of dormant period where there's not a lot of activity? Because our thesis was pretty clear at the time. These businesses are going to come back. You're going to travel again. You're going to go to a sporting event again. You're going to go see a baseball game again. You're going to go to a casino. You're going to go to a national park. We had such high conviction in the resiliency of the businesses to return. It was just a matter of getting to that other side. So in that first few weeks, that first month, it was survival. By the time we had kind of gotten our footing down, the focus became how are we going to better ourselves? How are we going to get much smarter about our business, our company? How are we going to understand our expense structure? How are we going to understand how we operate so that when the lights come back on and the public comes back to our venues, we can be that much smarter and that much more thoughtful and that much more better positioned to manage the business thereafter. So we started, doing all we could to really understand the economics of our segments and of our business lines at a level that we hadn't ever had to before. And I remember, days and days and days spent trying to understand the expense structure at a very granular level. Remember, when the lights are on and business is performing, you don't have to have this muscle. You don't have to have the muscle of trying to understand things at the granular level that we did during COVID. As an example, when you're in this time period, you're trying to turn over every stone to look for expense savings. And we spent a lot of time on this. We found a number of instances where we were expending money where we really didn't have to. One example I'd give you, just in our airport business, which is where I was managing at the time, we still had like 1,000 landlines in our units, in our stores, in our offices, in our commissaries, in our stands, and we found out they weren't really being used. There were no real business purpose using them. We had transitioned years ago to internet-based points of sale. Everybody had mobile phones or storefront. So we turned off almost all of our landlines, and we saved almost $1 million a year. Just in landline, phone line expenses that we're paying that really didn't have a business need. It was that level of focus, that level of creativity that we spent a lot of time on in this dormant period as we prepared for the business to resume. From there, we spent. We dovetailed that into dreaming big. How can we take the business cashless? How can we start charging sales tax that we didn't before? How can we introduce new technology? How can we do things better, faster, cheaper, more efficiently than ever before? So this in retrospect, became a period of time for almost a year where we prepared for the resumption of our business. We call it business resumption plans. And we thought that we would know the business that much smarter and be able to manage it that much more effectively so that when it did resume, starting in 2021 and then obviously into 2022, we'd be able to capitalize and drive the business that much better than we had before.
That's a great anecdote for a business owner or an entrepreneur to use sort of challenging times, but flip the lens a little bit and say it might be an opportunity. And as we get to your current role, this incredible promotion you got coming out of running the airport division into sports service and patina, I'm curious, Jamie, if that sort of self-reflection muscle, I think you called it, or the muscle where you really had to do deep dives onto the business lines and expenses, and less so on top line revenue. But as you took on this big new promotion and role, did that muscle come back to life for you, or have you done some similar, even without a pandemic or without the business screeching to a halt, but self-reflection on how you operate those two important divisions?
Good question. So to bring the listeners current, so I spent about a year in our airport business. I think the Jacobs family and the executives of the company felt a bit bad for me and a bit sorry for me. So they got me out of the airport business and into our sports business, which is really the legacy business of the company, and quite frankly, where a lot of the fun happens. Right? This is hospitality and concessions and retail and merchandise and food service at about 50 professional sports venues around the world, from Wembley Stadium in London to locations in New York City at MetLife and UBS Arena, where we're home of the Islanders and Jets and Giants, to Florida to Seattle to California, and kind of everything in between, from Chicago, St. Louis. So this is a spectacular footprint of sports assets and sports partnerships at the professional sports level, where we operate the venue on behalf of our clients and partners and all the hospitality. So it's a fun business line. It's the largest business line at the company in terms of top line revenue. So I transitioned to that in 2021. I've done that for the past few years. And then more recently added into the responsibility mix our restaurant division, which we call Patina Restaurant Group, which is about 40 high-value, high-quality, high-volume restaurants, New York, LA, and Florida. I think in terms of the learnings and the takeaways, the pandemic provided a bit of a catalyst, right? To force change and to force this introspection on our business. Once that's come back and the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, the challenge therefore becomes, how do you have that same mindset? How do you have that same mentality, that same degree of change management, that same degree of discipline of managing the business and really understanding things at a very deep level that you had and developed out of necessity during the pandemic? How do you do that regular way? And that's as much about change management and culture and focus as anything else. And that's where we've spent a lot of time in the past 2.5 years coming out of the pandemic without that need for change and need for managing the business at the level that we did. How do you maintain that same mentality? And that's what we focused a lot on. We've in the past couple of years, and I'm surrounded by a great team at Delaware North and Sports Service in particular that have been around for many, many years and really know how to manage the business at a very deep and focused way. We are challenging ourselves to continuously reimagine things that we never had before. We're introducing new technology. We're rebuilding our data and analytics focus and team to deliver next level analytics and dashboards and reports for the business that we never had before. We're taking a very focused approach to expense management and trying to move the needle on our margin profile for the business. We've introduced all kinds of new service styles and how we interact with our guests using digital technologies, using just walk on or autonomous technologies. You can come into a lot of our locations now and grab your product and just walk on. It'll capture your sales by your palm or your retinal scan or by eye or RFID technology. So we've introduced new technologies that we only dreamed about during the pre-COVID or pre-pandemic era. All of this is in the spirit of trying to better the business today without that same change management agent that we had during the pandemic.
How is it challenging? How is it possible to be in a company as big as Delaware North, but to take pride in innovation? And it sometimes I would think it would be easier at such a global company to just do it this way because it's always been done that way. But when you start talking about the different ways, point of sale and technology as a resource and not a liability. But how important is innovation to sort of the DNA at Delaware North?
Yeah, it's pretty critical. I think the criticality of it was more pronounced to us during the pandemic, right? Every company in America, in any sector, and every service company was constantly trying to reinvent itself and come out of the pandemic better and stronger than it had before. We wanted to do that. We want to be innovative. It's if you're not innovating, you're kind of falling behind. We've learned, and that pace of change or that pace of innovation has only accelerated. And we want to stick with it and lead it and be at the forefront of it. Now, the bigger the company you become, the harder that becomes, right? When you're a smaller company or an entrepreneurial new company, innovation is easier, right? Just the speed of which it can happen and the necessity of which it needs to happen is very clear. When you get to the size that we are, you got to really focus on it. And it becomes almost as much about the culture and the commitment to it as anything else. We've tried really hard, and we've got a lot more to go, but we've come a long way in the past 5 years on driving innovation within the business.
Tell me a little bit. You mentioned your time at M&T and J.P. Morgan. You used the word strong culture, and you've used that now to describe Delaware North, and I believe that, and I know they're a pillar of our community for good reason. But what does that mean as far as sort of team building and the emphasis either you personally or the company places on, recruiting and retention and training and mentoring? How, have you taken skills that you learned either with good mentors at M&T Bank or in New York City at J.P. Morgan and applied those to how you think about team building at Delaware North? Yeah,
look, of course, great question. I think it's critical. It's become more and more critical in today's world of having a culture that is very encouraging and supportive, especially of focusing and nurturing newer people to the company, integrating them into the business, teaching them in an apprenticeship type fashion, and giving them every opportunity to learn and grow and develop within the business. I think the culture at Delaware North, much like M&T, does just that. It creates an environment where people come into the company at various levels, from right out of college all the way through lateral hires in the business community to seasoned executives. And if we have the culture that we think we want to have, that provides an opportunity for them to come in and do well and flourish and learn and understand and grow their careers. And I think that's really the hallmark and the guiding principles from the Jacobs family all the way down within our business. Someone can come into our company, learn, and have every opportunity to succeed and do well and further their career in a very open environment with an environment conducive to doing just that, learning from each other, partnering, and pursuing your passions.
That's great. I tend to agree that it all, for me, starts with building out a strong team and recruiting curious individuals who are overachievers and get that there's more that goes into being successful than simply doing what is expected of them at their role. And so I certainly give the Jacobs family and you credit for recognizing that is a constant process and not just something that can be solved with one new hire. With that backdrop, Jamie, what opportunities are there for Delaware North to continue to grow and to continuing having an impact in our community and across the globe? I know it's a competitive landscape, and I'm certain that you probably bid against other competitors when it comes to landing new contracts at baseball venues or hockey venues. But what gets you most excited about what you think the future holds for you in Delaware North?
Yeah, great question. I think the company and the Jacobs family have the benefit of taking the long view. And if you think of us in the segments that we operate in, we are very unique in the sense that we're closely held, family-owned private company. There are not any real competitors in most of our segments that have that moniker. And what that allows us to do is to take the long view and be very flexible and very focused and very dialed in where we want to grow and how we want to grow. If you think of our sports business as an example that I spend most of my time in, all of our five primary competitors are all publicly traded, large, some mostly internationally owned conglomerates. We're the only one left that, again, is U.S.-based, privately owned and operated. And that gives us an enormous amount of flexibility to chart our own path and not be swayed or guided by quarterly results or public earnings expectations or public share price. We can be very flexible, very creative, and take a very long-term view to our business, and that provides an enormous amount of white space and runway to do a lot of really cool and fun and creative things for the business, not just a current business, but also growth opportunities in the future. So from that perspective, you can't help but, if you're in my seat or any one of my colleagues, be very excited about what the future holds for Delaware North and for its commitment to Buffalo and to the Western New York community. A lot of focus on being a very good citizen, corporate citizen here in Buffalo, no different than many other companies, including M&T Bank.
Tell me, Jamie, your role has evolved at Delaware North, probably going on sort of the third or fourth iteration if you add Patina Restaurant Group to the mix. Does it continue to evolve, or have you found a place where you're going to rest for the next few years and continue to refine your craft?
My unofficial and informal view of the business world is always on kind of a 3-year basis, I think. I think leaders really should think about their world or their remit from a corporate perspective in a 3-year window. The first year in a role or in a function or in a organizational structure should all be about learning. You should learn as much as possible. You should ask a million questions. You should meet as many people and clients and partners and employees and associates as possible. The second year in that role or that remit, you should be thinking about, okay, what changes can I implement? What is my change agenda? What is my strategy? What is my areas of focus? What are my hot points? Where can I add value? Where can I create economic value for ownership? In the third year, you go implement it all. You go put into motion your plans, your strategies, your business plans, and you put it all in motion. Now, it won't always be that linear and that clear cut, but that's kind of how I think about my role, my remit, my focus into that kind of 3-year window. So from that perspective, that's how I've motivated and challenged my own self, no matter what role I take on. First year, second year, third year, and by the fourth year, you're ready for your new challenge or expanded remit. So it doesn't always work exactly that schedule, but that's largely how I think about the business. Now, looking back again, I'm 7 years into Delaware North. I've had a great experience. I've got enormous admiration for the family, for my colleagues, for the executives, for the C-suite, and it's been that kind of roller coaster with the pandemic in the middle. The first 3.5 years was very growth oriented, very trying to capitalize on a growth trajectory, not only in the industry but our own business. And to further that, you had a year of COVID in the middle, which was kind of seeing the company from its highest of its highs down to the lowest of its lows, trying to figure out A, survival mode, and then B, recovery mode really quickly. And now we're approaching our full year post-pandemic, and we've seen the roller coaster back up to where our economic earnings and profits were at pre-pandemic levels, and in many cases far above them. So from a personal perspective, the journey has been quite an impactful one, seeing a company that has gone from the highest of the highs to the lowest of the lows and now back up to the highest of the highs, and having a bit of a front row seat to how we think about managing that process. Pre-pandemic, we had 60,000 associates in our company at all levels, from concession stand workers to housekeepers to car dealers. That went down to 600 in the depths of the pandemic. We're back up to well over 50,000 today. So seeing that roller coaster has been A, challenging, but silver lining, B, immensely rewarding from a career perspective to see how that thought process of a company evolves. Obviously, the most impacted associates are the ones that had their jobs impacted or their careers impacted. Now, most of that has been recovered, thankfully. But from a personal perspective, seeing that has been incredibly rewarding. Probably the most rewarding aspect of my journey so far.
That's awesome. Delaware North. That's I know that's incredible. When you put it in that perspective, the little bit of a roller coaster ride, and how your company and how you've helped lead the charge to sort of the new heights you've reached today is inspiring indeed. And I know, before we wrap this up, a couple final topics I wanted to ask you about. I know I speak for all our listeners when we're cheering most heavily for the Boston Bruins.
Yes.
as we embark on this, we hope another magical playoff run while we all are patient and await future success from our beloved Buffalo Sabres. But remind me and our listeners, I know I'm supposed to be rooting for the Bruins first and foremost above all else, but then I think I want to root for other stadiums or teams in which you have stadiums so we can see your success and your company's success. I think includes the Islanders, Predators.
Yeah, you're doing just great, and the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Oh, Tampa Bay Lightning.
You got it all covered. And what David's alluding to is the Jacobs family, in addition to owning Delaware North, have been the proud owners of the Boston Bruins NHL franchise since the early 1970s. Got the cup in 2011 and are back on the cup hunt this week with a game 2 tonight in the first round. So by extension, not only are we Sabres fans for living in Buffalo and Western New York, but all of us at Delaware North also wear 2 hats and are emphatic Bruins fans, especially this time of year, and by extension with our sports business, fans of a number of other teams as they pursue the cup in the playoffs.
That's great. Before I let you go, anything about you, Jamie, that maybe our listeners don't know about you, or your family, or your next great trip, or what's on your bucket list, or something that is none of us would know about you until you admit it right here now.
Yeah, thanks. I've I'm very fortunate in my current role in my seat. I've got 3 young children and a great wife. Children are 7 and 5 and 4 years old. They've all become sports fans and live entertainment and concert fans, and trying to integrate them into my day job and bring them along to sporting events and concerts has been incredibly rewarding and fun all the while over the past few years. That's been pretty exciting to see them kind of see myself integrate my personal life with my family life. My wife is a big country fan and a big Taylor Swift fan, so she's jumping at every bit to come to venues and do walkarounds with me and catch some of the music act. Beyond that, you and I both share a love not only for Buffalo and Western New York, but we share a love for a small island off the coast of Massachusetts called Nantucket that we've been going to for the past 10 years as vacationers, and get to spend some time with Dave and Amanda while we're there. So that's been great.
We'll have to join, get the families together at Cisco Brewery or somewhere fun on the island, Nautilus for dinner. But, well, Jamie, I so appreciate your time. I know you've got a ton going on these days. And so for you to take time out of your schedule to come spend it with me is most appreciated, and look forward to hearing more about your story in the future.
Excellent. Dave, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.